Hello, and welcome to the latest session in the RTS Digital Convention 2020. I'm Jane Turton, the Chief Executive of All3 Media, and with me today, I'm delighted to welcome Cecile Frot-Coutaz, the head of YouTube for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Cecile, you are one of those few people who's made the move. I think there are very few people who've done this, who've abandoned traditional television and made the move from traditional production into the new media world, as we used to call it, of YouTube. Talk to me, please, a bit about what that's been like, how different it is. Is it different at all, analog into digital? Talk to us a little bit about that, please.
Hi, Jane. Thank you for the question. So I made the move. It's been 2 years now, almost to the day. And it feels, on the one hand, as it's been a long time. On the other hand, as it's gone by really, really quickly. So obviously, it's very different, and it's very different in a vast number of ways. And I suppose I'll start with what Robert Kinsel said to me at the end of last year when we were wrapping the year. And at that point, I was a year in. And I was making that observation as, wow, it's been quite the year. And he said to me, "Welcome to China." And what he meant by that is, it speaks a different language. It operates differently in all kinds of ways. And so when you first join, there's things that just, hit you. And the first thing that hits you is the tools that you use, the acronyms, a lot of the phrases that are used. So there's a language piece that's obviously very different. But then there's a way of working. And one of the things I think strikes most people who come in from the outside is how collaborative the culture is. And it's super collaborative because it's heavily matrixed. And so the collaboration is almost hardwired into the, the structure, but also the tools. So, all of the Google Docs, the way the calendars work, the video conferencing, and for any given initiative, you can't make any progress if you haven't what Googlers called aligned cross-functionally. So these two words, align and cross-functional, are probably some of the two most used words in any sort of Google company. And so, again, what that means is you have, for any project, any initiative, you have these teams that form that have these cross-functional experts. And you only move forward if everybody aligns and gets to a place where we agree on the way forward. And so what that does is, I think there's a form of embedded governance in there, which nobody can run away with a train on their own. I also think it delivers an amount of kind of creativity that you don't always have otherwise, because you have to listen to other points of views, and you have a lot of experts around the table. So it's quite tough when you come in from the outside, because those structures are not necessarily visible immediately. So it takes a little while to understand how to operate within what is quite a fluid and ambiguous environment. And that's why when you join, people say to you, listen, it's going to take you at least 6 months before you can figure out your way around the place. And that same person said to me, it'll take you 18 months before you don't feel new anymore. And first I was like, oh, come on, right? It can't be true. And actually it is correct. Because of this, it's a vast place, right? And because of the vastness and the complexity and the way it works, it is correct.
Is it very slow then? I mean, that sounds on the face of it like that might be quite slow and incredibly tiring, because you've got to get buy-in from all sorts of people adjacent to your sort of primary activity.
So it can be when you're a little impatient. You're like, hey, come on, do we really need to have another meeting with 10 people to discuss this? And so, yes, it does take longer to get to a decision. Sometimes it doesn't, but it can take longer if it's something that's particularly complex or difficult. But I do believe you get to a better outcome, actually, in the end. So that the challenge is if you have a crisis, right? If you have a crisis, you need somebody to take charge. And actually that does happen. So the org is actually really good in a crisis and mobilizing super quickly and making things happen really quickly. So it knows how to flex between the things where it's okay to take a little longer and the issues where actually, you got to move super fast. So that's actually also really fascinating to watch. It's really fascinating to watch, like, how when people need to mobilize, it's just the whole thing just like moves super fast. So that's sort of one aspect, is this like alignment, cross-functional collaboration that again is completely hardwired, including into the performance evaluation system of sort of people within the company. Then the other thing that's interesting when you arrive from TV, especially from production, right? So when you're in production, as we all know, you develop a show, you sell it, you negotiate, you go in pre-production. It's quite a long cycle, right? It's, if my memories are correct, it's 2 years, on the unscripted side, between the time you have the idea to the time you get on the air, and sometimes it's up to 4 years in scripted. And you spend a lot of time just focusing on making that show like absolutely right? And this is an environment where you launch products that are not finished. And I remember when I first arrived, we were launching a new product on the platform, and people said, it's what we call MVP. So, it's a min viable product, but there's features missing and it's not quite there. And your reaction is like, well, hang on a second. Why don't we just take the time to, to actually complete it? And the answer is no, because we want to get it out there. We want to test. We're going to collect data, and we're going to iterate. And so there's this culture of constant iteration, collecting data, learning, and sort of fixing, that you can have, when you're, a tech company, and when you're a platform, that obviously, in the content world, you just don't have that sort of luxury and that ability. And what that leads to is, again, a culture of, you don't do this or that. When I arrived, again, we had a number of initiatives. And I remember thinking, well, should we just focus? And I was like, no, we do this and that.
Is that partly a function of the size of the operation? You've got the luxury in a way, haven't you? You can afford some failure. And in fact, you expect, I imagine, some failure, because not everything will work in this way. That's really interesting, though. It is different from television. I mean, I would argue, I'd love to pretend that every television programme that hits the air is the finished product. There is some degree of iteration, because, of course, formats change over time and get better and improve. But the first part of your answer is really interesting. The leadership required in an organisation with this amount of collaboration and sort of buy-in must be very different from the leadership in a traditional, slightly more sort of pointy triangle hierarchical company, I think, by the sound of things.
That's right, Jane. So there's a lot of, obviously, influencing skills. And I think the other thing that's really interesting from a leadership standpoint is it's a young population. Yeah. Now, it's not as young as sort of people would imagine it to be. And, obviously the orgs are growing. Google's over 20 years old now. YouTube's 15 years old. But it's a younger population than certainly I would have been sort of used to in sort of my former role. And so the expectations are different. And there's an expectation for relentless communication from the leadership. So it's town halls, it's all hands, it's ask me anything sessions, it's a lot of communication and a lot of transparency is expected from the leadership team.
And it has to be real. It's not fake, is
Correct.
it? You can't get away with that.
That's right. That's right. So culturally, again, that's, and it's different kinds of populations. So that's also been interesting for me. Yeah. And then I think the other sort of piece I would point to, which, I think is probably fairly obvious, but very data-driven, right? Very data-driven org. And also a different lens on what good looks like, from a growth standpoint. Again, coming from the traditional media world, where, there is some growth, but
it's a mature
fairly
business.
Mature businesses, right? These are startups. And, so I have a few funny anecdotes of, my first sort of month when, you look at sort of various markets, and obviously some are growing more than others, but, sort of the more mature markets, are growing at rates that, again, from a traditional media standpoint, you would look at and think that's a very healthy growth rate. But from a startup standpoint, it's actually seen as underperforming. So the bar
Yeah.
for what this look like is
very different.
Is very, very different.
Yeah. And just, let me ask you a different question. So describe it to me in terms of the business. So imagine, let's just play a silly game. You're at a soiree, let's make it real, in Paris with your ancient great aunt. And she doesn't understand the language of open platform or any of that. And she says to you, Cecile, apparently you've left those lovely people in traditional television and joined something new. What is it? How does it work? What is this thing called YouTube? How do you describe that without, please, no acronyms and no code?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it is it's a giant library.
Okay. No, I understand that. Yeah.
It's a giant library, right? But it's a giant library of videos, right? And that you can search, from your phone, your computer, your tablet, your TV screen, from anywhere. But that's what it is ultimately. It's a giant library.
So it's a library of content. It could be music.
Yeah.
Could be audio.
There's everything.
Could be video.
There's everything.
Okay.
There's music. There's documentaries. There's old
different
TV
languages.
episodes, all kinds of languages, right?
Okay, so it's a rich library of content that I'm the great aunt that I can get for free on my computer.
That's right.
Okay.
And you can search.
Yeah.
And if you use it a lot, it's going to get to know what you like. So it's going to actually start to offer you things that are similar to what you watched before or similar to what somebody else would have watched that also liked some of the things you spent a lot of time on. So if you watched X, the algorithm will offer more X, but it also might offer Y because somebody who watched Y also watched X, right?
Okay. So that is most benign and helpful. It's helping me find stuff in this world of complicated choice. Okay.
So it gets organized, it gets personalized for you. So the more you use it, the more it gets personalized to your tastes.
Yeah. And does it compete with television?
It competes with anything that competes with your attention, right? So it competes with newspapers, it competes with gaming platforms, it competes with TV, it competes with radio. It's both an information, an education, and an entertainment platform. So in that sense, yes, it competes for people's time and attention. But it's very different to television, right, in lots of ways, because it's a platform, it's a hosting platform. And so at its core, it's there to enable the connection between a content owner, creator, in the widest sense of the word, actually, right, and an audience, and to make that connection as rich and interactive as possible, right, and participatory as possible. So yeah, I guess it does compete with other forms of entertainment.
And one of the I'll go back to being me now rather than your great aunt. One of the sort of prejudices, I guess, if you're sitting in my chair, might be to be defensive about the we make professional content, quality content. People have trained for years and got an enormous amount of experience and are the best at their game, versus, I think, what you might say back to me, which is you're an open platform for all types of content creators, whether it's someone sitting in a garret in Soho or the north of Scotland or, in your case, around the whole of your territory. How does that all fit together, Cecile? Because my prejudice is my stuff's better because it's been professionally produced to a high budget and a high standard, and your stuff could be a whole load of all nonsense or anything. I really don't know. The point about your system is it allows most things, subject to safety, of course, to be made available. Talk me through, please, a little bit what might be a tension. It might not be, but talk to me, please, about that.
So, look, I think it is actually, when you come from the traditional sort of production world, it would be, you could call it a prejudice, I guess, coming into this world. I think what you find when you enter this world, and what I found, is there is the variety, the diversity, and the quality of these creators is actually astounding. But you have to think about it differently, right? The way I think about it is there's a spectrum of, content production. And you can define the spectrum in different ways. You can define it from a budget standpoint. You can define it from a format standpoint, from the shorter to the longer form. And there's an engagement aspect to it. And I think actually on YouTube, you find the spectrum on all those dimensions. And I'll come back to that in a minute in terms of sort of the trends that we're seeing. But so you find the spectrum. But the engagement that the users have with this content, which isn't professionally produced as defined by the traditional industry, is incredible. And again, what you find is there's a whole new generation of creators who are digital first, and that could be YouTube or Instagram or these other platforms, right? But they're digital first, and they might do something for television, but it's not their goal, it's not their aspiration. And they're typically creators who, are probably more niche, right, than broadcast television that still tries to be a big tent and needs to be a big tent. Where, if you're trying to find success on YouTube, you can find success by, having a niche proposition, building a community, and remember, it's an open platform. So by definition, your audience is not just national, right? It's an international audience. And if you're in the UK, then, English language, so obviously that goes without saying, you'll have 80% of your viewership sometimes that is outside of the UK. But even in France or Germany, which are, again, they're local languages, you have up to 50% of the viewership that comes outside of the
And I
core
find
market.
that's fascinating and really empowering, actually, isn't it? I mean, we obviously have Little Dot in our company, and they are one of your long-time partners. And I love the fact that there are guys and girls sitting in Little Dot, young people who've probably not travelled to most of the jurisdictions that the content that they are managing is being viewed in. Mm-hmm. And yet, the global nature of this platform is truly remarkable. It is empowering, it's exciting. And I think, a bit like, to be fair, on some of the SVOD platforms, same thing. We're seeing programmes dropping, made available simultaneously, dubbed into multiple languages, of content made in the north of England or France or Germany. Fascinating. No respect for jurisdiction point, I think, is really interesting in a good way.
That's right. I think that's one of the richness of this new world, right?
Totally.
And with my Fremantle hat on, I remember I just loved it when something that was French or Italian, all of a sudden found an audience, right? Because there's a freedom there that's great. And I think same thing, with these sort of YouTube creators, I watch on a regular basis a French news creator he must be 23 years old, and he does a daily news digest, and he's brilliant, and he has 1 million subscribers, and it's in French. But again, he speaks to a new generation, and when you speak to him, he says, Cecile, young people do care about news. They just want it delivered in a way that speaks to them, and so that's what he does. You have examples all over the place. You have, I remember once meeting a woman in, I think she was Brazilian, who was a TV host. That's right, she was Brazilian, TV host in Brazil. And she, through personal circumstances, she felt that there was a chance, an opportunity to create financial programming for women, so financial advice. And she pitched it to, I think it was SBT or Globo, and they said, no, nobody's going to be interested. So she started to do it in her spare time. And she's got this full-fledged production business, where she produces this content, and it's huge. So you have a lot of examples like that. Patricia Bright in the UK, same thing, who, now does something similar, who starts, I think what it affords experimentation. Right? So people start and they'll do one thing and it'll sort of do well, it'll grow. And then it's pretty under the radar, right? So you can really, you can iterate.
And the barriers to entry have come down.
They're very low, right?
Yeah.
And you can you don't have to be in London, or you can be wherever in the UK, in France, in Germany, and start something. And you can do it as a side thing, and then, if it's sufficiently, at some point becomes sufficiently lucrative, that you give up your day job and then you do it, and then you grow a business.
And are we allowed to call it an ecosystem? Because I would like to be, I'm an optimist, and I'd like to believe that there is space for all of these types of platforms in the future world. I think the barriers to entry have come down, but I'm sort of assuming that quality still remains key. Whether it's quality Rolls-Royce or quality Mini, the point is it has to be a well-produced piece of content for people to want to watch. And if they don't want to watch, it disappears. So I think you've still got all of those tests in there, which is positive. And I think I hope that the content, the importance of content has never been greater, again, I would argue, and I think you would agree. So I like the ecosystem. I think it's massively overused, of course, in television. We constantly call ourselves an ecosystem, but I think it's the right expression.
I think that's right. And I think, again, it goes back, the authentic. When you talk about quality, there's a point to me about authenticity and relevance as well in there.
Yes, integrity, maybe that word.
That's right.
Yeah.
Which I think is incredibly important. And again, when I see these creators, you see that sort of in spades. And I think, again, to go back to the diversity and the richness, is that personalization as well, that it's easier to do when you have direct to consumer digital distribution without the gatekeeper, right? And I came across a stat sort of recently, which I thought was really interesting, that 60% of what's watched on a given day on YouTube is less than 7 days old.
Oh, wow, that is interesting.
Right? So is that sort of kind of relevant?
So it's literally current affairs, even if it's not literally current affairs.
So something happens, the creator can take it, react to it, and it doesn't have to be news or information, but it can be any sort of cultural trend. You have that ability, again, to iterate and to do something really, really quickly. So I think that's sort of kind of interesting. And again, to go back to the viewer's expectations, right? It kind of also creates expectations for that kind of immediacy. So for me, it's, to your point about the ecosystem, is very complementary and very different to, producing The Crown for Netflix, right? And obviously there's room, I'm an optimist. I believe there's room for the full spectrum. But I think my point is to my old industry, if I want to call it that way, is there is a richness of creativity in this new generation that shouldn't be overlooked.
Well, no, we should embrace it.
Right.
I mean, look,
That's exactly
I am
right.
your old world, and I don't feel like a dinosaur. I think quite the opposite. I actually think what we're learning to do is to embrace that and work with that, and hopefully that broadens everybody out.
That's right. That's right.
Let me talk a bit about your world territory-wise, because actually you encompass a whole range of countries in your job, with a very diverse, I would imagine, set of challenges and opportunities. How does that all fit together in a day job, with one person looking across that breadth of geography? So
I'll sort of use a funny quote from my colleague Matt Britton, who leads Google in EMEA, and he always says, "Look, listen. Obviously EMEA, it's just a collection of territories, and it's just quite a convenient way of a Californian company to organize the world, right?
Yeah.
It's like all the bits that kind of don't fit. APAC is sort of fairly straightforward. Americas is like one continent, and then you got this region called EMEA. So, but joking apart, so what is EMEA? You have a combination of obviously fairly mature markets, obviously the Western European markets where, you have high internet penetration, where YouTube is, fairly well distributed. So that's, sort of one set of challenges. And there it's really about continuing to support the creator ecosystem and, making sure we support them, we help them grow, we help them monetize. We're very focused on product adoption. So YouTube is a platform that launches up to 1,000 different products a year. Product being, features on the platform, right? So a lot of those features are designed to, again, support this ecosystem, and that could be mobile creation tools, that could be new ways to interact with your audience. It can be products like memberships, so you can offer, as a creator, your own subscription product to your members with special benefits and perks, etc. So a lot of work around this creator ecosystem and continuing to support its diversity and its health, if you will. So that's sort of one set of kind of initiatives. And when you start to move to other territories, take SSA, for Sub-Saharan Africa as an example, very different challenges, because there you have an access challenge, right? So obviously much lower internet penetration. And then within that, YouTube's quite heavy in terms of data usage. And it's perceived as being heavier than it actually is, right? So there are challenges. Access is making sure finding ways to get more people to use YouTube. And that's from a product standpoint, what can we do to make YouTube lighter in SSA And then what do we need to do to shift people's perception of YouTube being data heavy, right? So that would be like our priority for SSA. And then you have markets where, take Russia as an example. Russia is probably our largest creator ecosystem in the region. Fast growing. It is the fastest growing music market worldwide. And I'm not just saying on YouTube, just from a music industry standpoint.
Is this both consumption and creation?
Consumption.
Yeah.
Now, geopolitically, very complicated, right, for an American company to operate. So that's an example of a market where
Do you see yourself as an American company? It's an interesting point, actually.
Well, the world sees us as an American company.
Yeah, okay.
So, obviously when we're, YouTube Russia is about, Russian partners, Russian creators. We have a Russian team. But the Kremlin sees us as an American company, right? Take Turkey as another example. Again, fast-growing market, very interesting from a content standpoint. But the government's just put in place some new media rules, which, are going to be very, very difficult for us. Because again, we're an open platform. We're nonpartisan. And when we moderate content, which again, our responsibility is a big priority for us sort of globally. So we have, rules for content moderation. We have guidelines. So we remove content that either is illegal or breaches the guidelines. But if the government calls us tomorrow morning and says, listen, this one creator who said something we don't like, and you remove it, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that.
So talk a bit about safety, please, because obviously safety and moderation and compliance are issues that, as content providers to the traditional platforms, we're well accustomed to. And it's something I'm sure you've talked about a lot. Talk a bit about that, please.
So obviously it's something we talk a lot about for obvious reasons. Look, I would say, I've been here 2 years. It's one of our biggest priorities. It's one of the areas where we've probably put the most investment. And that's both on the machine learning side and on the people side. It's a complex subject, as you can imagine, because you're an open platform. So you invest a lot, but it's never going to be perfect. The other thing I would say is it's what's the most talked about when it comes to YouTube. It's super important, but it's actually quite a small problem if you quantify it. So in other words, the amount of content that you would describe as bad is actually less, it's a fraction of a percentage of what's on YouTube. How do we approach it? The first thing to bear in mind is you have two categories of content. You have content that is illegal, which obviously has to come down. It's very straightforward. Where you get into the bit that's harder is what's legal, but judged harmful. Because there's no rule book for what is harmful. And as a platform, the one thing you don't want to be doing is making decisions on the fly and in an arbitrary fashion. So that means that you have to put in place what I call the rule book or the constitution, which are those, what we call the community guidelines, which are those content policies, which basically say on YouTube, not everything goes. This is the rule book of what we deem unacceptable. And if those lines are breached, content will come down. And then there's content that gets close to the line, doesn't quite breach it, where the approach is to say, getting the benefit of the recommendation engine is a privilege, right? So that content it can still live on the platform, but it's not going to get all the bells and whistles that sort of YouTube may offer. So that's the framework. And then once you have a framework, then it becomes about detection, which is done through machines and through human beings who flag, right? And then once the machine flags or human flags, then it gets reviewed. And you need the machine and the human reviewers because there's nuance. And the machine's not very good at the nuance. So the machine might pick up content that is educational, that is part of a news report, and it's not necessarily going to make the difference between that and something that is, a video. So, take the Holocaust, you could have a sort of neo-Nazi video glorifying the Holocaust, which obviously would breach a policy. You could have an educational documentary about it that would stay up. But again, from a machine learning standpoint, both would be flagged, right? So that's the framework. Where it gets sort of interesting and complicated at the same time is the framework cannot be static because the world changes, the world moves. So if you take COVID as an example, when COVID happened, obviously we didn't have any policies to deal with COVID misinformation. So we had to create them, and then we had to evolve them because we found, as an example, we started to see conspiracy theories around 5G mass creating COVID, and people would go and destroy the 5G towers. So we had to, again, create a policy to make sure we could remove that content. And the lens that we always take is harm when it comes to misinformation, right? There's misinformation that is completely harmless. You could argue Santa Claus is misinfo, right? Yeah. That's pretty harmless. But it's what causes harm to the real world.
Yeah, no, it's a big subject, isn't it? It's interesting, and presumably one of the other challenges is territory by territory, the filters will differ, or the offence might be felt in a different way, or reactions would certainly be different. So I imagine for a global business of the size and scale of YouTube, that also poses quite an interesting challenge.
That's right, because when you train the machines, you can't train the machines, differently. So look, when it comes to content that's illegal, then obviously you have to have a territory by territory approach. But otherwise, we have, to the extent that is possible, we have to have a global approach. Yeah. Otherwise, and also the other problem is if you start to fragment it too much, you run the risk of actually making mistakes.
Yeah. No,
right?
I see that.
The more it's bespoke and the more it's nuanced, the harder it is for both the machines and even the reviewers to do their job at scale, right? And then you open yourself up for really making mistakes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting, but
and the responsibility that comes with the success of the platform,
right.
of course.
Right. That's right.
Tell me a little bit about your priorities in your role. What is it that you're looking into 21 and 22 and wanting to achieve? So
some of the things that we're seeing, just to go back to what we were talking about earlier, which is creativity and sort of a new generation of creators, is, and this is interesting because sort of YouTube is a fairly recent platform, right? It's 15 years old. But if you're a YouTube creator, you're still pretty much today editing and posting off of the desktop. And today, actually, you have a whole new generation of creators who are mobile first. So, and obviously we've seen it with TikTok and the growth of a platform like TikTok. So these super short sort of mobile first videos. And again, there you have to make the distinction between the format and actually the means of creating the video. So that for us is a big big initiative for next year. We've actually also already launched a product in India, and it'll get rolled out over the next year, sort of to 18 months. So it's to enable mobile creation in the app at scale, as opposed to, you're filming, from a mobile standpoint, but then you have to sort of upload separately. So that integration of the creation tools within the app is really interesting. And what that leads to is, it sort of almost redefines UGC, right? Because actually on YouTube now, a lot of those creators are, I would say, professional or semi-professional, as redefined by the YouTube ecosystem. And in a world that's, this mobile first world, a large part of the users are also creators. So I think that's something that we're sort of seeing is, again, the extension of this notion of creation.
So does that sort of change the sense of immediacy? Do you get content? Does it make it quicker? Does it make it simpler?
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
And it's, you don't necessarily, I think the expectations, again, how you define success is different. So they're not necessarily people who are going to become professional creators. So it may be that, a video starts to go viral it'll create a meme and then it goes away. So there's probably more discovery, quicker to get to success, but it doesn't necessarily lead to the same path as if you're, a slightly longer form sort of creator in the traditional sense of sort of YouTube. And we're also seeing that it's helping break a lot of music, right? Or re-break sort of old tracks. And it reminds me of when we started American Idol, right, where we would play, a lot of cover songs, and it sort of put them back into the zeitgeist. So I think sort of mobile creation, as in embedded into the tool, is going to be a big area for us. And I think there's, in terms of other frontiers, is commerce and video. Again, as a kind of mid to long term sort of area of opportunity, I think is really, really interesting.
And is that what we always have called e-commerce
No,
using video?
well,
Is it?
It's much more integrated and embedded. Right. So I think that's really interesting. And I think we'll see sort of more innovation in that area in the next few years, not just on YouTube, just like in general. And I think just, again, from a YouTube standpoint, YouTube is increasingly being watched on big screens.
Yeah.
Which, I think in the UK, 30% now of YouTube is watched on a big screen. And again, what are the implications sort of for us of that is sort of interesting.
Well, it's an irony, isn't it, in a way? You've got it being produced on smaller and smaller devices and watched, I guess advertisers like this, watched on bigger and bigger screens. Yeah. And is the stuff that's being watched on bigger and bigger screens more frequently, is that typically what I would call television programs, like the big shows that you have on YouTube that have been produced for a primary customer called a public service broadcaster, for example, or is it a combination of all sorts of things?
Combinations. It's varied. It's really varied. I think where we're finding also this, which you would expect, especially, during lockdown, sort of family viewing as well, right? So used for co-viewing, which sort of kind of makes sense. And then we continue, obviously, to focus on sort of responsibility and what I would call the responsibility products. News and information is a part of that. We see also a real opportunity on the health side, quite a broad definition of health, ranging from making sure that when people come to YouTube, they find authoritative information, health information. So that's, working with the NHS, working with, in all our key markets, with the government health authorities to help them have video on the platform, to inform people, to educate people. There we also see a chance of linking influencers with these authorities to, again, help get the messages to...
It's almost educational in
that
sense.
That's exactly right. To help get a message to a younger group of users. We found that during COVID. We really played a big role in relaying the messages of the governments, stay at home, using creators, using musicians, artists, to talk to a generation that initially at the beginning of the crisis wasn't necessarily paying attention. So we see health as a real area of opportunity for us where we can make a difference. And again, it's the hardcore health piece, working with the authorities, but then it's also the belonging piece. So what we find in terms of user behavior, people come to the platform, they look for information. So I've been diagnosed with cancer. What can I find as information? But then very quickly, they look for community. They look for people who may have the same thing, have had experienced the same thing, and then that's where the longer sessions are, the longer experiences, is that sort of belonging piece. And then you have the lighter part, which is, fitness and, fitness, well-being, mental health. So we're seeing the health piece as something that, we want to spend sort of more time building up and building up ecosystems to support it on the platform.
And a moment ago you mentioned Idol, and obviously that comes from Fremantle, and you were in charge of that show for years, I know. What's the future for those big media brands, and what role does YouTube play in that? So the big brands being either the theatre brands, as in cinema theatre brands, television brands, animation, whatever it may be, whichever audience. What role do you play in helping actually to create those? I'd like to know that as a television producer.
So look, I'm going to now go back to, my sort of Idol days. And this is, it's partly anecdotal, partly not. But, when we relaunched American Idol on ABC, so this would have been, trying to remember the date, 2016 probably. And, it was a tough exercise because it'd been off air and we had to relaunch it. But we had a very totally 360 social media digital strategy when we launched it. And not just when we launched it, when we started to conceive the new version. And we managed to recruit more young viewers than the show ever had, or certainly had in in the last few years of its incarnation of Fox. And there's no mystery. There's no mystery that 360 approach. And we invested financially a lot in making that happen. We invested money we didn't have, actually, as part of the production budget or fees. And to this day, and actually we did some research after the fact that actually did show us the link between what the activations that we had done on platforms and the fact that we were able to engage again, a younger group of viewers. So I'm a really big believer in that.
So could you go as far as to say that Tim Davie or Carolyn McColl ought to embrace you and work with you on the partnership, and actually that 360, as you describe, is the sum of the parts adds up to
completely.
More than...
There's a lot of incrementality. I mean, look, I was looking at some data a few months ago. This is French data, and I was talking to this is a French broadcaster, and in France we're integrated. The Médiamétrie, which is the Barb of France, integrates has a measurement system, 3 screens, so digital, not TV, but at least on all the digital screens. And you can see that YouTube has 6 million incremental 18 to 34 users to this particular broadcaster's platforms. 6 million, completely incremental.
And they're travelling, presumably they're watching and coming onto your platform and then going back to the television and coming onto your platform. Is that your argument?
When I say incremental, I mean they don't touch.
Oh, they don't even go to the television platform?
Completely incremental. Okay. There's another 1.5 million that are in common. So there's 7.5 million in total. Yeah. Of that 7.5 million, and those numbers are approximate because I haven't looked at them in a couple of months, there's 1.5 million that are common. Yeah. 6 million that are completely incremental. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And those numbers are not about to change. So
it's interesting. So back to our ridiculous sort of game at the beginning with your great aunt. There is competition for eyeballs and time. There's no doubt, but actually, I think what you're saying is there is also a route through this where actually the collaboration and partnership can work to create the bigger brand, the bigger franchise, the global franchise, definitely, for example. Is that fair? I mean, is that...
That's right. And there are markets, not the more mature Western European markets, but there are markets where YouTube is used very much as a VOD service for long form. And, I would encourage broadcasters to experiment with, if you launch a new series, why not do a premiere on YouTube in simulcast and launch the first episode as well? There's not a lot of downside to actually experimenting and just looking at the data and just understanding, what works. Look, recently, this is maybe about a month ago, for the first time we had live F1 games on YouTube. We had one. It was a German game and German race. And it was very successful just in terms of pure viewing figures. But what F1 found is, I think over 60% of that audience was a young audience that, again, they weren't getting, right? So I think you have to be
nimble.
You have to be prepared to experiment. Because you know what, the sky's not going to fall, right? You might, if you do it, for a few programs, you might find, what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work, right? But I guess my message would be just, try it out.
And on that note...
Flex the model.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Cecile. I think on that note, the trying it out note, let's say thank you very much. That's been fascinating. And it's a pleasure to meet you in person, actually, at the moment. It's great. So thank you.
It feels like a real treat.
Yes,
thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much. And thank you to YouTube for sponsoring the RTS Digital Convention 2020. There are more sessions to come. Please look out for them later this month.